Now, what this equation means is complex. There are lots of relational implications here. One of them is that all other things being equal, the greater an individual's satisfaction with the relationship is, the more likely they are to stay in that relationship. Which sounds like common sense, of course. But we also have to keep in mind another implication, which is that sometimes an individual in a relationship will endure what seems like a considerably extreme cost if they perceive a future payoff that will make that cost worthwhile. At the risk of perpetuating a stereotype, imagine people saying that they put up with a lot from their partners because they were looking forward to the ultimate, well, to a reward in the form of a wedding ring. Um, Ideally, what we want people to strive for are what we call ultimate exchanges, where each person expends a cost that doesn't feel like much of a cost to them, and in doing so creates a reward that the other person regards as highly rewarding. My wife loves to cook, and so she cooks, and I value that immensely. And I don't mind cleaning up after dinner, and she hates cleaning up after dinner. So we have something there akin to an ultimate exchange. She prepares the dinner, and I take care of cleaning after dinner. Both of us are getting something that we value highly without having to do anything that we really regard as much of a chore or a high cost activity. Now, when one person is constantly giving and another person is constantly receiving, ultimately, then those uneven exchanges can lead to a sense of obligation. And that is an important implication of social exchange in relationships. In fact, it can be one that, taken to an extreme, could lead someone to consider leaving a relationship. So, why do people leave relationships? Even within families, marital relationships, why do siblings stop interacting with each other? Well, social exchange gives us an answer there. If we find ourselves in relationships where we perceive that the outcome of an alternative relationship would be more profitable than our current relationship, we are increasingly likely to consider leaving that relationship. There are a couple of concepts that come into play here. One is what we call a comparison level. The comparison level is the point at which a relationship becomes acceptable. And so we are in relationships, hopefully, because those relationships exceed our comparison level. However, if something happens in that relationship, if we stop getting the rewards we're getting, or if those rewards become too costly, they might, they might fall below our comparison level. Another thing that could happen is regards another concept, what we call the comparison level of alternatives, which goes something like this. What would it take for you to leave your current relationship? And for some people, the answer is nothing. There's nothing they could do because their comparison level of alternatives is so high that there's no one out there who's going to provide what it would take for them to leave the relationship. But for other people, not so much. Um, Sometimes people have relationships that surpass their comparison level, but not their comparison. I'm sorry, that surpass their comparison level, but find themselves introduced to an alternative that exceeds their comparison level of alternatives. When another option comes along that passes that standard, that initial relationship becomes more unstable, and people are more likely to consider leaving. We choose to enter new relationships if the perceived outcomes of the current relationship isn't as high as the perceived outcomes of the alternative, even if that alternative is no relationship at all. Sometimes people leave a relationship because they'd rather be alone than be in a relationship that they no longer find rewarding. Social exchange theory is a theory that helps us to understand relational termination on one hand, why couples split up. And it also helps us understand family cohesion, why people choose to stay together. And the message is within that. The main message within that is that for people who want to maintain those relationships, we have to make sure that we're achieving some balance in giving and receiving rewards, and that we are exceeding the comparison levels of our partners, that we're giving them what they need in order for this relationship to be regarded as valuable. Now, describing this theory from a meta-theoretical standpoint is a little tricky. On one hand, it's a highly quantitative theory. It's an economic theory at heart. And the question, excuse me, the economic theory kind of proposes a single truth that suggests that what we need to do is find a way to measure what people perceive as valuable and what people perceive as costly, and that if we can measure those, we can give you a pretty good idea of whether people are going to stay in that relationship. Now, the humanists are going to argue, wait a minute, those rewards, those costs and look and sound different for each person. So every relationship has different costs and rewards. So the answer, I think, is somewhere in the middle. Certainly not a hardcore scientific theory, and certainly not an extreme interpretivist theory. It's more a mid-range social science theory um, that has, well, a measurement challenge. How in the world do we measure costs and rewards? Um, we can certainly talk with people about what they regard as valuable, but that assumes that they know everything that they regard as valuable. Sometimes we encounter, years into a marriage, sometimes you might become aware of something you appreciated about your partner that you didn't realize before. Excuse me. There um, is social exchange theory in a nutshell, although a big nutshell, because it's a complicated one that's informed by everything from sociology to economics. And I hope it's one that you'll find useful as you continue to learn more about family communication.